Hey, my name's ShawNshawN. I sell art on ShawNshawN.co and specials on eBay. Today we're going to review The Empty Man. So this is a film by David Pryor. He also wrote the story, the screenplay, and it's based off a book, so it has this nice consistency from taking a book. And the screenplay writer is also the director. That can be very strong because you get all the dialogue exactly how you want it, more or less. Time is 2 hours, 17 minutes, so a little long, but it's a horror film, so those go a little bit longer sometimes. We have actors James Badge Dale as James Lasombra, this detective kind of investigating the crime. Stephen Root is Arthur Parsons. Joel Courtney is Brandon Mailbaum. Marin Ireland is Nora Mailbaum. Aaron Poole is Paul. So these are all the characters from the Act 1. Samantha Logan is Devar Walsh, one of the victims of the demon, the high school kids. So it starts off kind of these backpackers are going to Tibet. They walk across a bridge, a little spooky. They're walking ahead, and then one of the guys kind of just spaces out and he keeps walking, and then he falls into a crevice. And they're like, oh my God, because they see their storm's coming. So they get the guy out, go in the basement. It looks like maybe he's bitten by a spider. They don't know what. So they strip him down. He has no bug bites. They don't know what's wrong with him. He's kind of like comatose. They start carrying him. And he's like, oh, I can't carry him. I can't carry him too long. And then the storm starts kicking up and they find a house. They're like, all right, we'll stay at this house overnight. And while they're in the house, they have one of the girls, like the next day, they see like this figure in the snowstorm and like, who the hell is that? Then their friends are at the other door and you're like, did you see anyone out there? And they're like, we didn't see anyone. We didn't see anyone. You're like, what the hell is going on, right? The next scene, the comatose guy's kind of woke up and he's speaking something into one of the girls' ear. And then the next thing you know, like they're all killed and you're like, what happened, dude? That's like the whole story. Just like boom, right at. So a lot of spoilers here. But yeah, it's just totally shocking. Act 1 comes to abrupt close and you're like, where's the story going, right? And then so they flipped ahead to America and you're like, why does this have to do any connection with the first Tibetan film? You don't really find out until Act 3. It slowly brings it and then it kind of laces it together. So it's a really nice, the two really different stories and then it gets laced together finally. So it's very satisfying, but very subtle draws, very subtle foreshadowing that you might not get, but you kind of get if you've read about horror, about some of the cult history, you kind of start piecing it together what's going on here. So there's a couple interesting things here is you have kind of this demon possesses the victims and then they end up committing some kind of suicide. And it kind of has that religious overtone of, the survivors of a suicide victim, they usually are in denial that there was anything wrong with the victim and maybe they were possessed. So it has this kind of religious overtone of, kind of escaping the responsibility of forcing the person who was in trouble and then they actually commit suicide. So it's kind of like that really nice, like, is suicide actually suicide or is it actually kind of possession by demons or past spirits or something? So it has kind of that nice little bit of feel to that, which is really nicely done. They had this really great scene where the detective's kind of deep in the woods and then he finds this people by the bonfire and the bonfire spirals higher to the sky. And you're like, what the heck is going on? All of a sudden the music stops and they turn and then they don't come at him right at once, but then he's like takes a step back, they take a step forward, they take a step back, he takes a step, then he's like, oh my God, let me get the hell out of here. So that's a really great chasing and build-up scene in the film. Very spooky sense. They also had this idea of the empty vessel of a man is kind of a very Christian belief or earlier origin story, creation beliefs of other religions going all the way through human history of man was created by clay and then kind of God put the spirit inside of it and then boom, it's reanimated, right? So it's a really interesting aspect that you have kind of this really ancient belief of how man was created and they bring it into a modern day horror film and you're like, does that make sense? Is it possible? The also really cool thing is in the Act 2-3, there's this kind of cult that's centered around the empty man and this belief in the empty man. And you're like, what does that have to do with Act 1? And it slowly starts to kind of pull together how they're intertwined. And it's really interesting because the cult leader really reminds me of the leader of Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard. So you're like, dude, are they making fun of Scientology in this film or are they just making fun of cults in general? And you're like, it's very loosely poking fun, I think, of Scientology a little bit. It's more just any kind of crazy cult, right? They all have this kind of crazy belief that the reality isn't the reality and we have the really true vision. Like they have like the sky isn't blue, it's actually red. And you're like, what the hell are you talking about? But it's kind of like these triggers that religions use on people that are very weak in character, they get drawn into these cults, and then they have these really weird belief system, and once you get beyond that, then they kind of have you on the hook and they can tell you any kind of rubbish, right? So, but any religion kind of has these weird stories that just don't make any sense if you think about it logically. Like you think about Christianity, it's like, oh, there's God in the Father, there's a God in the Holy Spirit, and there's a God in Jesus, and you're like, what are you talking about? No other religion believes like there's this Trinity. Like any other religion is like, it's Buddha, there's one person, right? There's Muhammad, it's one person. So it's interesting how each one of these has these weird belief systems that, you know, once you accept that, you kind of fall into whatever else they want to kind of pitch you. And the difference between religions and cults is, you know, kind of a little bit blurry. Like every religion is kind of starts as a cult and then it becomes more of an established religion, or it's not too sinister and it is actually very helpful in general. But yeah, this is kind of, you can see it's like a deep kind of dark cult, and you know, they really cover that pretty well. And as this guy's kind of investigating, Detective La Sombra, yeah, he just kind of finds more and more disturbing things and folders on people he knows. So it's like, what is this? You know, wow, how do they have all this information? There's also a great backstory on the detective. He keeps telling the next door neighbor, like when her daughter disappears, like, well, have you told her what happened with us? And he's like, no, I haven't told her. Does she suspect anything? No, I haven't suspected anything. And it comes out later during the thing that why his wife was going with their kid for a drive, he was actually cheating on his wife with his next door neighbor. So it's, you know, there's a really terrible backstory, and the wife dies, and so he's obviously this really disturbed, you know, brokenhearted guy. And yeah, it just has some great parallels in this story of the true horror of life versus just kind of a fantasy version. So it's kind of interesting. You have like the fantasy version of the ghosts and this possession, and but then you have the reality of cults and the reality of suicides and the reality of if you do something terrible in your past, it kind of haunts you for the rest of your life. So you have that kind of two juxtapositions of the reality of the real world and the belief in the spiritual world. So it's kind of, it interesting, kind of pulls this together very nicely. I would encourage you, it's definitely, I don't know, you know, just based on where I'm at in my life, it's very disturbing. But yeah, it's a pretty well shot film. Definitely unsettling, which is what you want with a horror film. But more unsettling than I thought it would just be kind of, you know, you look at these kind of campy films like, you know, Jason or Nightmare on Elm Street, you're just like, okay, this is fake, it's just fun, right? But this is kind of like, is it really fun? Is it really fun? Is it really that far from reality? So it's kind of interesting, that gets really under your skin after a while. And the foreshadowing is just really great with like the wedding ring, taking drugs versus putting on a wedding ring, the zoom in from the map, and that kind of feels like a little bit like The Shining when Jack is looking down at the hedgerows and he sees everyone kind of moving around the hedgerows. You're like, wow, is that possible, right? And you have that kind of similar thing where the guy's, you know, coming to the map, he goes into the forest, and then he's actually driving in the forest, and then later it's like these people are after him. You're like, what the heck is this? So some really great overlays from earlier horror films. Another great overlay from the horror films is the demon will do kind of a, I don't even know how they make the sound, but it's like this clicking sound. And that sound was used, I think, in The Ring a lot, and that's a super spooky film to see the first time you see it. The second time it isn't, because the first time you see it is based off, you watch this TV of the Ring, then you actually get possessed later and killed off by the demon. So when you first watch that film, you're like, oh dude, I'm gonna be killed in like in 7 hours. But then you watch it the second time, you're like, oh thank God, it's not possible. But that premise of that film is super spooky. And this one has a little bit of that too. Like he's watching the TV set and there's some weird things in the TV. So a little bit kind of Ring-esque, a little bit in the second act. But it's really interesting how he gets drawn in, the detective, and then later he becomes actually possessed by the demon. And you're like, what is going on? You know, like act 2, you know, 3 just pulls so tight. Like it's like you're lacing a boot and then all of a sudden it's like, whoosh, and it really pulls tight, full circle effect. So really great film from that aspect. I would recommend it if you like horror film. If you don't like horror film, it's probably going to be, you know, maybe disturbing. If you want to see my other reviews, you can check below. And I'll see you on the next review. Thanks for watching, guys.